She took my platinum card to go on a trip with her boyfriend. I exposed her lies. Imagine finding out your whole life has been a lie. You think you're in a perfect marriage, but one simple mistake unravels everything. In this jaw-dropping story, I discover a shocking betrayal that will make your heart race. What would you do if the person you trusted most shattered everything you knew? Stay tuned to find out how I took control and flipped the script in the most unexpected way. This story is more than just about revenge, it's about reclaiming your life. There was a time when I truly believed that my marriage with Vivienne was perfect. I had worked tirelessly for years, putting in long hours at the office, pushing through all the pressure and stress that came with building a solid future for the both of us. I was proud of what I had achieved, not just for me, but for her. Vivienne, my beautiful wife, was everything I had ever wanted. She was stunning, elegant, and always the center of attention wherever we went. She had this aura about her, a kind of magnetic charm that made heads turn whenever we walked into a room. It never bothered me. In fact, I liked it. I loved showing off my stunning wife to the world. She was everything a man could dream of. She had grown up in wealth, and I had always admired her taste. Her love for luxury didn't seem excessive to me. It felt like something she was simply accustomed to. Her world was one of elegance and indulgence, and I was more than happy to provide for that. I worked hard to give her the life she had always known. The fine clothes, the designer bags, the trips to exotic places. And I thought, as long as she was happy, then I was too. We had a beautiful home, a life most people would envy. I couldn't help but think I had it all. A perfect wife, a perfect life. But looking back now, I see how blind I had been. I ignored the warning signs for far too long. It started with the late nights. She'd always tell me she was out with her girlfriends, catching up. But I knew something wasn't quite right. The whispered phone calls, the secrecy when I asked about them. She brushed it off as nothing, just work, she'd say. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being lied to. And then there were the extravagant purchases, designer bags, expensive jewelry that showed up in our house without any real explanation. She'd smile and tell me they were gifts, or that they were on sale, or whatever excuse she thought would work. I believed her. I wanted to believe her. I thought, maybe this is just the life she's used to, and I'm the one lucky enough to give it to her. But I should have questioned it. I should have known better. I should have realized that love alone wasn't enough to keep someone loyal, not in a world like this. But I dismissed it all. I told myself that I was just overthinking things, that I was paranoid. After all, Vivienne had always been so social, so full of life. She loved luxury, but that didn't mean anything. She had always been like this. But there was this nagging feeling in the back of my mind, a feeling I couldn't shake. I thought I could brush it off. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. The first real crack in our perfect world came one evening, when Vivienne told me she was going on a girls' trip to Paris. She had always loved to travel, and I never thought much of it when she mentioned it. It wasn't unusual for her to go on these spontaneous trips with her friends. But this time, something felt off. The suddenness of the trip caught me off guard. It wasn't planned ahead of time, and she seemed unusually eager to leave. I shrugged it off. She was just being Vivienne. But as she packed, something inside me started to stir. "You just planned this out of nowhere?" I asked, watching her fold silk dresses into a designer suitcase. I could feel the tension building in my chest, but I didn't want to say anything that would sound suspicious. I had no right to question her. She smiled at me, that dazzling smile that always melted my worries away. "You know how it is, babe," she said, brushing off my concerns with a flick of her hair. "Claire and the girls just decided to go last minute. You wouldn't want me to miss out, would you?" Her words sounded convincing, but my gut twisted. I smiled back, trying to mask the unease that had already started to grow. "No, of course not," I said, shaking my head, forcing a laugh. "Have fun." She kissed me on the cheek, lingering just a little longer than usual. For a moment, I let myself believe everything was fine, that maybe I was overthinking it. After all, this was Vivienne. She was a social butterfly, always out and about with her friends. That night, as she packed her things, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Maybe it was just me being paranoid, but it didn't feel like a simple girls' trip. I had always spoiled Vivienne. Weekends away, luxurious vacations, everything I could afford. It was my way of showing her I loved her. But this trip, something felt different. She was acting like this was the most normal thing in the world, like it was no big deal. But why did it feel like I was being kept in the dark? I told myself to calm down. It was just a trip, after all. Nothing had changed. But as I sat in the office the next day, going through my usual routine, I couldn't get the feeling out of my head. I kept thinking about her smile, the way she kissed me goodbye. It wasn't like I had never spoiled her before. Hell, I had always been the one to swipe my card for all our getaways. But now, it didn't sit right. I was overthinking this, right? That afternoon, everything changed. I was sitting at my desk when my phone buzzed with a notification. I glanced at it, thinking it was just a reminder or an email. But when I saw the message, my heart stopped. It was from the bank. A first-class flight ticket had been purchased under my name. I stared at the screen, trying to make sense of it. I hadn't booked any flights. I hadn't planned any trips. I tapped into my banking app, my hands shaking as I logged in. There it was, a first-class ticket to Paris. At first, I thought it was a mistake. Maybe Vivienne had booked the ticket under my name. She had done that before, right? But something inside me told me this was no mistake. This wasn't a simple misunderstanding. My pulse quickened as I scrolled deeper into the transaction history. More charges, more payments. All luxury hotels, designer boutiques, and Michelin-starred restaurants. All booked under my account. Everything was lining up perfectly with the dates Vivienne would be in Paris. But there was one thing that became clear. This wasn't a girl's trip. This wasn't some spontaneous vacation. No, Vivienne was in Paris with someone else. I felt like I had been hit in the stomach. For years, I had been the fool. She had used me, used my money to fund a fantasy, all while she smiled at me and promised to call every night. The anger started to rise in my chest. I wanted to call her, demand answers, and hear her admit what she had done. But then I paused. No, I wouldn't give her the satisfaction. If I confronted her now, she would lie. She would twist the truth, make up some excuse to make me doubt myself. She thought she could get away with it. But she was wrong. I stared at the flight details. It wasn't just one ticket. There were 2 first-class seats. And when I checked the name of the additional passenger, I saw it, Luca. I didn't know much about him, just a name Vivienne had mentioned a few times. A friend, she called him. A business acquaintance. But now, he was the one flying first class to Paris with my wife. He was the one sharing my money, staying in the hotels I had paid for. He was the one sleeping in the bed I thought was only mine to share. My hands clenched into fists. My heart raced with a mix of anger and disbelief. How could she do this to me? How could she live this double life and think I wouldn't notice? But I would make her pay for this. I was done being the fool. And so, the plan began. The game had changed. This wasn't about love anymore. This was about revenge. And I was going to make sure she paid for everything. The moment I saw that first-class flight booked under my name, everything changed. My heart was pounding in my chest, my thoughts racing. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I had been blind for so long, trusting Vivienne, thinking she was my partner, my confidant. But here it was, in black and white, a blatant betrayal that I couldn't ignore anymore. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my shaking hands. There had to be an explanation. This couldn't be happening. But the more I looked at the screen, the more it became clear, she had been lying to me. She had been deceiving me for months, maybe even longer. I tapped through the transaction history, trying to make sense of it all. The more I dug, the worse it got. A luxury hotel reservation in Paris, booked under my name. A Michelin-starred restaurant with a booking for 2. Then, the charge for a shopping spree at a high-end boutique. All of it was connected to her trip. But there was no doubt now Vivienne wasn't going on a girl's trip to Paris. She wasn't out there with her friends, living it up and posting on social media about some vacation getaway. No, she was with him. Luca. The name echoed in my mind like a slap to the face. I didn't know much about him, only that he was some business acquaintance Vivienne had casually mentioned a few times. But now, that name, that man, was everywhere. My hands were trembling as I kept scrolling through the charges. The luxury goods, the high-end restaurants, the private clubs, all the signs of a life of indulgence. A life I had been funding. It was all there. And it was all for her. For Vivienne. For Luca. But I had been a fool. I had spent years building this life, this dream, thinking that everything was as it seemed. Thinking that Vivienne was happy, thinking that she was mine, but no. She had been playing me, she had been playing us both. I wanted to call her. I wanted to scream at her, demand an explanation. How could she do this to me? After everything I had given her, after everything I had done for us. How could she betray me like this, right under my nose? The anger bubbled up inside me, but I swallowed it down. No. I wouldn't give her the satisfaction of a confrontation. I wouldn't let her manipulate me into thinking that somehow I was the one in the wrong. No. I would not give her that chance. I kept my cool, staring at the screen. I needed more proof, more evidence to back up what I already knew. She thought she could hide it from me. She thought she could carry on with her secret life and I wouldn't find out. But I had found out. And now, I wasn't going to let her get away with it. The details were right there in front of me, all of them. The flight details. The hotel reservations. The extravagant spending. And the name Luca. He wasn't just some business acquaintance. He was the man who had been sleeping with my wife, while I paid for their lavish lifestyle. He was the man who had been living the life I should have been living. The man who had been taking what was mine. I leaned back in my chair, letting out a slow breath, the weight of the situation sinking in. My hands were still shaking, but now it wasn't just from anger. It was from something else. Something colder. Something darker. A calm realization settled over me. Vivienne had made a huge mistake. She had underestimated me. She had thought she could get away with this. She thought I would never notice, that I would never question her. But she was wrong. So very wrong. I wasn't going to lash out. I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of seeing me fall apart. No. I would take control. I would show her just how much she had underestimated me. I would let her dig her own grave. And when the time was right, I would strike. I kept checking the flight details, over and over again. Her departure was in 2 days. She would be flying out with Luca, living it up in Paris, thinking that everything was going to be just fine. But she had no idea what was coming. I wasn't going to confront her now. I wasn't going to let her twist the truth, spin some story to make me doubt myself. No. I had a plan. I was going to make sure she couldn't get away with it. Not this time. I picked up my phone and called the bank. The line was answered quickly, and I kept my voice steady as I explained the situation. I need to report some unauthorized charges on my account, I said smoothly. The representative went through the usual questions, confirming my identity, verifying the charges. I gave her all the details, never once faltering. As far as she was concerned, I was just a concerned husband, noticing suspicious transactions. But she didn't need to know the whole story, not yet. Within minutes, the process had begun. The cards were locked, the transactions flagged. The flight was cancelled. The hotel bookings revoked. The shopping spree Vivienne had clearly been planning. Gone. Everything was falling into place. I sat back in my chair, a slow smile creeping across my face. I felt a sense of satisfaction settle in my chest. This was it. She would have to face the consequences of her actions. But I wasn't done. No, not by a long shot. Vivienne had spent years making me believe she was someone she wasn't. She had been living this double life, acting like the perfect wife while I was the fool who funded it all. But that era was over. I wasn't the man who would just forgive and forget anymore. She had taken everything from me, and now, it was time to take everything from her. I made another call, this time to the airline. I need to make some changes to a reservation, I said, adopting a casual tone. My wife and I had a flight booked, but I need to make some adjustments. The representative quickly brought up the details. Yes, I see the reservation for 2 first-class seats to Paris, she confirmed. And the other passenger, Luca? She added. There it was, in black and white. Luca. My hands clenched into fists. I couldn't believe it. But I didn't let the anger take over. I kept my voice calm, even as my mind raced. Actually, I'd like to cancel both seats, I said casually. She hesitated for a moment, but then confirmed the cancellation. When I hung up, I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. Vivienne would be in for a rude awakening. Her perfect little getaway, the life she had built on lies, was about to come crashing down. 2 days. That was all it would take. 2 days until Vivienne showed up at the airport, thinking she was going to board a flight to Paris, only to find out that everything had been cancelled. She'd be stranded, confused, panicked. The look on her face when she realized everything she had planned was gone. It would be priceless. I could already picture it, her walking up to the gate, flashing her first-class ticket with that smug smile of hers, only to be met with confusion and denial. Her frantic calls to me, desperate for help, and me, ignoring them, letting her suffer. It was almost poetic. For 7 years, I had been the one to provide for her, to trust her, to love her. And now, she was going to feel what it was like to lose it all. When she finally made the call, I would be there, waiting. I would listen to her cry, beg, and plead. But I wouldn't care, not anymore. She had burned every bridge with me. And now she would have to face the consequences. The clock was ticking. 2 days until everything changed. 2 days until Vivienne learned what it felt like to lose everything. Wait a minute. Just when you thought this couldn't get crazier, it does. What's the real story behind her trip? Is she really with someone else? Or is there more to this betrayal than we know? How do you think it's going to end for her? Will she get away with it, or will I make her pay? Drop a comment below and tell me what you think will happen next. Will the truth be exposed, or is there an even bigger twist waiting for us? Comment 1. If you think there will be a big twist. Comment 2 if you think the truth will be revealed. The hours dragged on as I sat in my office, staring at the blank screen, unable to tear my eyes away from the details of the flight cancellation and the growing evidence of Vivienne's betrayal. Everything was happening so fast now. The pieces were all coming together, and with every passing minute, my anger simmered beneath the surface, boiling hotter with every revelation. I knew that I had to keep my composure. I had planned this carefully, meticulously, but the reality of it was beginning to sink in. Vivienne had been lying to me. She had been living a life of deception, one I had been too blind to see. It felt like someone had ripped the rug out from under me. But instead of crumbling, I stood up straighter, stronger, more determined than ever. I replayed everything in my mind, the late nights, the whispered phone calls, the moments when I felt like something wasn't right but pushed it away. How many times had I overlooked her odd behavior? How many times had I let my doubts slide, brushing them off as overthinking? I had trusted her. I had loved her. But now, I was left with the truth. Vivienne had been living a double life, one that I wasn't even a part of. She had been sneaking around with Luca, her business acquaintance, and I had funded their entire affair without even knowing it. The realization hit me like a freight train, but it wasn't just anger I felt now. It was something else, something colder, something that would drive every step of my plan forward. I knew I had to wait. I had to be patient. But the waiting was torture. Every hour that passed felt like a lifetime. Vivienne was out there, completely unaware that I had already discovered her secret. She was still in her world, laughing it up with Luca, enjoying the life that she thought I would never know about. But I had the upper hand now. I had the power, and I wasn't going to let it slip through my fingers. The flight cancellation had been just the beginning. I wasn't done. I wasn't even close. There was still so much to do, so much to set in motion. Vivienne thought she could walk all over me, that I would always be the one to forgive and forget. She thought that when everything came crashing down, I would be there to pick up the pieces, to bail her out, to fix things. But I wasn't that man anymore. I wasn't the man who would give her a second chance, who would turn a blind eye. I was done. I clicked through the transaction history again, each charge a bitter reminder of how she had used me. The expensive hotels, the lavish dinners, the designer shops, all of it had been funded by me. My hard-earned money had been spent on her lies, on their secrets, and it sickened me. It made my blood boil, and yet, I couldn't help but feel a sick satisfaction. She had thought she could get away with it, but now it was my turn to turn the tables. As I leaned back in my chair, I couldn't help but smile. Not out of happiness, but out of the realization that I was in control. For the first time in what felt like forever, I was the one calling the shots. Vivienne was about to learn a lesson she would never forget, and I was going to make sure of it. 2 days. That's all I had to wait. 2 days until everything fell apart for her. 2 days until she was stranded, alone, exposed. I could already picture it in my mind. Her at the airport, walking up to the gate with that false confidence of hers, only to be met with confusion. The look on her face when she realized that the ticket she had been so sure of was gone. The panic that would flood her when she realized that she had no way of getting on the plane, no way of getting back home. The helplessness that would consume her when she checked her bank account and saw that everything was locked. Every dollar I had spent to fund her lies, now out of her reach. But I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of seeing my anger, my frustration. No, I was going to be calm, collected, and methodical. I had already planned out every step. The hotel reservations canceled, the flight revoked, the credit cards frozen. There was nothing left for her to rely on. I had taken away everything she thought she could count on. And now, I was going to watch as it all fell apart. I checked the clock again. 2 days. That was all. But every second that passed only built the anticipation, and it was almost unbearable. Vivienne had no idea what was coming for her. She was still in the dark, still thinking she had everything under control. But when she boarded that plane, when she showed up at the gate with that smug smile, she was going to realize just how wrong she was. It was almost poetic. For 7 years, I had been the one who gave her everything. I had been the one to trust her, to provide for her, to love her unconditionally. And now, she was going to lose it all. And it would be my turn to watch her struggle. I could almost hear her frantic calls to me, begging for answers, trying to explain herself. I would ignore them, of course. I wouldn't let her manipulate me, wouldn't let her twist the truth. She had made her choice. She had chosen Luca over me. Chosen a life of lies over the life we had built together. And now, she was going to pay the price. I picked up my phone and made another call. This time to my lawyer. The divorce papers had been drafted. The wheels were in motion. I was no longer going to sit back and let her control the narrative. I had already decided what I was going to do when she came back. She was going to face the consequences of her actions. I wasn't going to let her waltz back into my life and pretend like nothing had happened. There would be no reconciliation. No second chances. When the lawyer picked up, I didn't hesitate. "We're moving forward," I said, my voice steady. "Get everything ready. I want the papers filed as soon as possible." He confirmed everything, and we went over the details. I wanted to make sure every asset was protected, every account was frozen, and every detail was accounted for. When Vivienne returned, she would have nothing left. No money, no luxury, no access to the life she had been living at my expense. And when she walked through that door, thinking she could talk her way back into my life, she would find out just how wrong she was. She would see the divorce papers on the table, and realize that everything was over. There would be no coming back. And that realization, that moment of complete and utter defeat, would be the sweetest victory I'd ever tasted. 2 days. That's all it would take. 2 days until Vivienne's perfect world crumbled. 2 days until the woman who thought she could get away with everything would realize that she had nothing left. And I would be there, watching as it all unfolded. 2 days. That's all the time I had left. And in that brief span, everything was about to change. I felt it in my bones, that feeling of power settling deep inside me. The kind that only comes when you're finally in control. Vivienne had no idea. She thought she had everything figured out. She thought she could play me, lie to me, and get away with it. But the truth was, I had already won. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It wasn't about the flight tickets or the designer clothes. No, it was about showing her that I was no longer the man she thought I was. I spent the day going over everything in my mind. The plan was simple, yet perfect. Every detail had been accounted for. She would think she had everything under control, that nothing had changed, that she was still living her charmed life. But she was wrong. I had already taken everything from her, her access to the money, the flights, the luxury. And now, she was about to feel the consequences of her actions. I could almost picture it, her at the airport, walking up to the gate, thinking everything was fine. She'd flashed that first-class ticket with that smile of hers, the one she always wore when she knew she had the world at her feet. But the moment she tried to board that plane, it would all come crashing down. The confusion, the panic when she realized the flight was canceled, the desperation when she pulled out her credit card and saw that it had been frozen, that her access to everything had been cut off. It would be beautiful. And then, when she called me, I could already hear her voice. Frantic, shaking with fear, trying to explain herself. trying to manipulate me into fixing it, like I had done so many times before. But not this time. I would ignore the calls. I would let her squirm, let her experience the chaos she had caused. I wasn't going to be her safety net anymore. She had thrown away everything I had given her, everything we had built together, for a few fleeting moments of excitement with Luca. And now, it was time to make her realize just how big of a mistake she had made. The more I thought about it, the more satisfying it became. I wasn't going to be the fool anymore. I had played my cards right. She had no idea what was coming. She had no idea that everything she thought was safe was about to be taken from her. I sat at my desk, staring at the phone in front of me. The next call would be from her. I knew it. She would be panicked, lost, and desperate for help. But I wasn't going to give her that. I wasn't going to be the man who saved her this time. I had already seen enough. She had crossed the line. There was no going back. I couldn't wait to hear the fear in her voice when she finally realized she was stranded in Paris. With no money, no way to get back, no way to continue living the life she had come to expect. I could picture it so clearly, her pacing through the airport, trying to figure out how to pay for a cab, for a hotel, for anything, only to realize that every card she tried was declined. The panic, the embarrassment. She had thought she could get away with everything, that she could live a life of lies without consequence. But now, the consequences were coming for her, and there was nothing she could do about it. I imagined her calling Luca, begging him for help, only to have him brush her off. After all, why would he stick around when the money ran out? He had been enjoying the ride as long as I was the one footing the bill. But now that the cash flow was gone, so was he. I knew how men like Luca operated. They didn't stick around when things got tough. And Vivienne? She had no idea how deep she was in. She thought Luca was her escape, but he was nothing more than a distraction. The moment she realized she had nothing left, he would be long gone, leaving her with nothing but the reality of what she had done. But even as I imagined all of this, there was a part of me that still couldn't believe it. How had I let this happen? How had I let her take everything I had worked for, everything I had given her, and throw it all away for some affair? I had loved her. I had given her everything. But in the end, that wasn't enough. She wanted more. She wanted excitement, thrill, and the luxury of living a life without consequences. But now, she was going to learn the hardest lesson of all. There are consequences for every action. And sooner or later, they catch up with you. It wasn't about revenge, not really. It was about justice. It was about making her face what she had done. It was about showing her that I wasn't the man she thought I was. I wasn't the man who would sit by and let her walk all over me anymore. I wasn't the man who would forgive her for using me, for lying to me. I wasn't going to be the one who fixed everything. As I sat there, waiting for the moment when Vivienne would realize that everything had been taken from her, I couldn't help but feel a sense of peace. It was strange, almost calming, to know that the end of this chapter was so close. The betrayal had hurt, yes. It had torn me apart to see how easily she had discarded everything we had. But in the end, it wasn't about the pain anymore. It was about reclaiming my life, reclaiming my dignity, and showing her that I was done. Done with the lies, done with the manipulation, done with everything she had put me through. I had given her every chance. I had been patient. I had trusted her. But now, she was going to learn the hard way that when you burn bridges, you don't get to come back. And when she finally called, begging for help, begging me to fix it, begging me to make it all better, I wasn't going to answer. I wasn't going to save her. Because she didn't deserve to be saved. 2 days. That's all it would take. 2 days until Vivienne's perfect world crumbled, until she realized that the life she had taken for granted was no longer hers to live. And when she faced the reality of what she had lost, I would be there, watching, knowing that I had taken control of my own life once again. I had prepared for this moment, the culmination of everything that had been building up over the last few days. As I checked the clock once again, only a few hours remained. Vivienne was somewhere out there, blissfully unaware that everything she thought was secure was about to crumble beneath her feet. I could already hear the panic in her voice, the desperation, the frantic calls she would make once she realized that everything had been taken from her. And I was ready. I was ready to let her feel what it was like to be completely and utterly helpless. The thought of her at the airport, walking through the terminal with that confident smile, only for it to falter when she realized there was no flight waiting for her, made my blood run cold with satisfaction. Her mind would race, trying to piece together what had gone wrong. The flight she had been so sure of, gone. The hotels she thought were booked under her name, canceled. The credit cards she had been using so freely, locked. Every last one of them, with no way to access a dime. I imagined her walking through the terminal, trying to get answers from the airline, only to find out the hard way that she was on her own. She had no idea that I had already taken the power from her. The control was mine now, and there was nothing she could do to fix it. I knew how this would play out. She would call, of course. She would try to guilt trip me, beg me for help, and spin her usual stories, just like she always did. But this time, I wasn't going to be there to catch her when she fell. I wasn't going to listen to her excuses, her pleas for forgiveness. No, this time, I was going to let her face the consequences of her actions. She had betrayed me, had used me, and now she was going to feel what it was like to lose everything. The longer I sat there, the more I realized how far she had pushed me. She thought she could keep living this double life. This fantasy world where she could have her cake and eat it too. She thought that as long as she kept up the facade, everything would be fine. But it wasn't fine. And it wasn't going to be fine for her anymore. She had crossed a line that she couldn't come back from. And now, she was going to have to live with that reality. The first phone call came exactly as I expected. My phone buzzed in my pocket, and I knew it was her before I even looked at the screen. Vivienne. She must have just reached the gate, her mind racing, already starting to panic when she realized the flight was canceled. I took a deep breath before answering. There was no need to rush. I had already won. She needed me now, but I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of seeing me fall for her manipulation again. David, it's not working. Her voice cracked as soon as I picked up. I don't understand. The flight, the booking, it's all gone. What did you do? Why did you cancel everything? I could hear the panic creeping into her voice, the desperation that I had been waiting for. But I kept my voice steady, calm, like I was talking to a stranger. What do you mean, Vivienne? I said, making sure to sound surprised. Why don't you tell me what happened? There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I could hear her breathing heavily, as if she was scrambling to figure out what to say next. But I wasn't going to let her off the hook. Not now. Not ever again. I don't know, she stammered. I checked everything this morning. It was fine. I don't know why it's not working. The card, everything's frozen. Please, David, please help me. You have to help me. You can't just leave me stranded like this. It was almost pathetic, hearing her beg. I had been the one who had always been there for her. The one who had trusted her. The one who had supported her every time things went wrong. But this time, I wasn't going to be her safety net. I wasn't going to swoop in and save her. I was done. And she needed to know that. I'm sorry, Vivienne, I said, my voice devoid of emotion. But I can't help you anymore. You've made your choices. Now you get to live with them. There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. I could hear her trying to hold back tears, but I wasn't going to soften. I had already seen enough of her manipulation, her lies. David, please, she whispered, her voice cracking. I know I messed up. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. Please, just help me get back. I'll fix everything, I swear. I couldn't help but chuckle. The audacity. The sheer nerve she had to think that I would still help her after everything. After everything she had done, everything she had put me through. She was still trying to worm her way out of the consequences. You don't get it, do you, Vivienne? I said, leaning back in my chair. There's nothing left to fix. You've already thrown everything away. And now you're going to pay the price. Her silence on the other end of the line spoke volumes. It wasn't the silence of someone who didn't care. No, it was the silence of someone who realized they had lost it all. The silence of someone who had nowhere else to turn. I could almost see her standing there, the weight of her actions settling in, her world collapsing around her. I wanted to feel sorry for her, I really did. But I didn't. Not after everything she had done to me. You can call all you want, Vivienne, I continued, my voice low and steady. But you're not getting out of this. You made your bed. Now you'll have to lie in it. I hung up before she could say another word. The satisfaction I felt in that moment was indescribable. I had waited for this, had planned for it, and now it was happening. Vivienne was finally experiencing the consequences of her lies. It was too late for her to fix anything. And there was no one left to save her, but herself. I sat back in my chair, staring at the phone in my hand. I wasn't the same person I had been when she left. I wasn't the same man who had been willing to forgive her over and over again. I had changed. And I was stronger now. The past was gone, and the future was mine to control. I knew she would keep calling. She would keep begging, keep pleading. But it didn't matter. I had already made up my mind. She had lost everything, and it was time for her to face the consequences. There was no turning back now. And when she finally realized the full extent of what had happened, when she saw just how far I had gone to take everything from her, that would be the moment she understood. She had underestimated me. And it would be the last mistake she ever made. The next few hours passed in a blur of anticipation, but I couldn't tear myself away from the thought of Vivienne. She was out there, still scrambling, still trying to salvage the life she thought she could always count on. She had no idea that I had already prepared the perfect trap for her. No idea that I was sitting in the calm of my own control while she spiraled into chaos. She was out there, calling everyone she could think of, trying to fix what couldn't be fixed. The image of her frantic, helpless, and desperate played over and over in my mind. It was almost poetic how she would be forced to confront the mess she had made of everything, and I couldn't help but relish it. But the real moment, the moment I had been waiting for, was just around the corner. When she stepped into that airport, when she tried to get through security with her canceled ticket and frozen accounts, the realization would hit her like a freight train. And I knew that when it happened, the desperation would flood her. She would panic. I would hear it in her voice when she called me again. And when that call came, I would be ready. I had already made up my mind that there would be no coming back from this. No chance of reconciliation, no forgiveness. The woman who had taken everything from me, my trust, my love, my loyalty, would finally face the consequences. When I thought about it, it wasn't just the betrayal that hurt. It was everything. The way she had made me believe in a lie for so long. The way she had used my love against me to fund her secret life. She had betrayed me in the worst possible way, and now she was going to pay for it. There was no remorse in me now. No regret. Just cold, calculated satisfaction. I had worked too hard to build this life to let her destroy it for her own selfish desires. And as much as she had tried to paint herself as the victim over the years, now she was the one who would be left to suffer. Alone and exposed. The first few calls came in, just as I had anticipated. I didn't even look at the screen. I didn't need to. I knew what they were going to be: pleas for help, desperate cries that I would have heard a year ago, and felt the tug of sympathy in my chest. But not now. Now, I was calm, detached, almost numb to her manipulation. I let it ring, the sound of it cutting through the silence in my apartment like a sharp knife. But I didn't pick up. She could leave a message. She could scream at me through the voicemail. It didn't matter. She had no power here. I had taken that from her. And then it came. The one call I had been waiting for. The one where she would be at her breaking point. Where the reality of what had happened would finally sink in. I heard the panic in her voice when I answered. It was almost like I could see her, standing in the middle of that airport, her makeup slightly smeared, her clothes a little more wrinkled than usual. She had always been so put together, but now she sounded like she was unraveling at the seams. It was almost satisfying. "David, please. Please, I don't know what's going on. They won't let me on the flight. I can't get through to anyone. My card's been declined. I can't get a cab. I don't know what to do. Please help me. I need you. I can't stay here." Her voice was raw with fear, but I could hear the cracks, the desperation creeping in. She had always thought she could rely on me, that I would always be there to pull her out of the mess she created. But now, she was realizing the hard way that I wasn't going to rescue her this time. No, this time, I was the one who had the power. This time, she would finally understand the consequences of her actions. I let the silence stretch between us. She was waiting for me to speak, waiting for me to cave and tell her everything would be fine, that I would fix it all. But I didn't. I just listened to her breath, ragged and uneven. As the weight of her situation sank in, I could almost feel her panic, her frantic thinking as she tried to figure out what to do next. The realization that she had nowhere to turn hit her hard. "I don't understand. she gasped, trying to steady herself. David, I didn't mean to hurt you. I made a mistake, but you have to believe me. Please. I can fix this. I can make it right. I need you to unlock my accounts. I can't do this without you. I swear, I'll make it up to you. Please, don't do this. Don't leave me like this. Her voice was pleading now, and for a second, I almost felt the pull to answer, to give in, to give her one more chance. But I knew better. I knew what she was doing, playing on my emotions, trying to manipulate me into saving her. But I wasn't falling for it. Not anymore. I had seen through her act for far too long. She had used me for so long, and now she was going to learn what it felt like to be on the other side. To be powerless, to be alone. You don't get it, Vivienne, I said, my voice as calm as ever, no trace of the anger I had felt earlier. I'm not going to fix this. You've made your choices. You've spent so long pretending everything was fine while I was being lied to. You're not getting away with it anymore. You wanted to live a life without consequences, but now you're facing them. And I'm not going to be the one to bail you out. I'm done. The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. I could practically hear the gears turning in her head as she processed my words, as she realized just how final it was. I had said it. I had drawn the line. There was no going back for her now. I'm sorry, I added, my voice almost a whisper. But this is what you've made me become. And I'm not sorry for it. I hung up the phone before she could respond, not even waiting to hear the anger or the begging that would come next. I had heard enough. She had no more excuses. And I had no more patience. Vivienne was finally going to face what it was like to live without me. To live without the safety net she had always relied on. She had spent so long taking me for granted. But now, she would see what happens when you push someone too far. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt a sense of peace. The control was mine. The game was over. Vivienne had lost. The next day felt like a drawn-out eternity. I spent it in a haze of anticipation, knowing that soon, Vivienne would return. Thinking she could walk back into my life and pick up where she left off. I was prepared for her. But what I didn't expect, what I didn't prepare for, was the moment she would actually walk through that door. I had everything planned, the divorce papers, the finality of it all. But it didn't feel real. Not yet. Not until she arrived. I went about my day with a sense of calm detachment, letting the hours tick by. Vivienne was just a few hours away. And I knew exactly what would happen the moment she stepped into the house. The thought of her walking through that door, her eyes filled with hope, expecting me to be the man who would welcome her back, made my stomach tighten. She had no idea what was waiting for her. No idea that her world, the one she had built on lies and betrayal, was about to come crashing down. I made sure everything was in place, the papers, the lock on the bank accounts, the final evidence that she couldn't deny. I had to see her face when she realized it was over. That she had no chance of getting back into my life. She had spent so long pretending, so long thinking she could play me. But the truth was, I had already seen everything. I knew everything. And now, it was her turn to face the music. When she finally pulled up in the driveway, I could hear the sound of her car outside. The faint hum of the engine cutting through the silence of the house. My heart didn't race. It didn't need to. I was calm. I was in control. She thought she was coming back to a home, but all she was coming back to was the cold reality that she had lost everything. The door opened, and there she was, standing in the entryway. For a moment, she looked almost like the woman I had fallen in love with. The woman who had once made me feel like I was the most important person in the world. But that feeling quickly faded. This wasn't the same woman. She wasn't the woman I had known, not anymore. David? Her voice was soft, tentative, as if she expected me to greet her, to hug her, to tell her everything was going to be okay. But I didn't move, I didn't react. I just stood there, staring at her with a calm, unreadable expression. David, she repeated, her voice shaking slightly now. I know I messed up, but I've thought about it. I've thought about us, about everything, and I'm sorry. I can fix this. Please, just give me a chance. Please, don't let everything we had just end like this. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. But I didn't let it show. I didn't flinch. I had been prepared for this moment. For the words, for the manipulation. This was Vivienne at her best, trying to pull at the strings of my heart. Trying to get me to feel guilty. trying to make me believe that all it would take was a few tears, and a few words to make it all go away. But I wasn't that man anymore. Not the one who would fall for her tricks. Not the one who would pick up the pieces of her broken promises. I'm not the man you think I am anymore. Vivienne, I said, my voice low and steady. You don't get to just walk back into my life and act like nothing happened. You've betrayed me, lied to me, and used me. And now, you're going to face the consequences of your actions. There's nothing to fix, nothing to salvage. This is it. Her eyes widened, a flash of panic crossing her face. For a moment, she seemed to lose her composure. David, no, please, she began, but I cut her off. No, I said firmly. There's nothing more to say. I moved slowly, deliberately, over to the table where the divorce papers sat, neatly arranged. I picked them up, sliding them across the table toward her. She looked at the papers, her eyes filling with disbelief as she realized what they were. The shock was evident on her face as she looked up at me, searching for some sign that this was a joke, that I was just playing with her. But there was no joke. There was no coming back from this. This was it. And she knew it. Her voice cracked as she reached for the papers, her hands trembling. David, please, she whispered. Please don't do this. I love you. I made a mistake, but we can fix this. I can change. I can prove it to you. But I wasn't listening. I had heard enough. This wasn't about love anymore. This was about taking back control. I had given her every chance, every opportunity to come clean, to be honest. But now, it was too late. She signed the papers, her eyes never leaving mine as she did. When she finished, she set the pen down and looked up at me, tears welling in her eyes. But I didn't feel pity. I didn't feel sympathy. I just felt relief. The weight of the past few weeks, of everything she had done, was finally lifted. It was over. I'm sorry, she whispered, but it was too late for apologies. I looked at her one last time, a final, cold smile on my lips. You're free now, I said. You can go. And with that, Vivienne turned and walked out of the house. The door closed behind her with a finality that was almost deafening. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could finally breathe. The door clicked shut behind Vivienne with a finality that echoed through the empty house. I stood there for a moment, the weight of everything settling over me. For a brief instant, I almost expected her to come rushing back, pleading for forgiveness. But the silence in the house was absolute. This time, there would be no apologies. There would be no second chances. It was over. She was gone, and nothing could undo the chain of events that had led to this moment. I didn't feel the rush of anger that had consumed me the night I discovered her betrayal. I didn't feel the bitterness I thought I would feel. Instead, I felt something unexpected relief. The weight of living a lie had been lifted, and now, I was free. Free from the woman who had used me, lied to me, and taken everything I had given her for granted. Free from the uncertainty, the constant feeling of being manipulated. It was like a heavy shackle had been broken, and I could finally breathe again. I slowly walked over to the window, staring out at the empty driveway. It felt strange, like the calm before a storm had finally passed. There was no more pretending, no more walking on eggshells. Vivienne had made her choices, and now she was living with the consequences. But for me? For the first time in a long time, I felt like I had control over my own life again. The world wasn't spinning out of control. I wasn't drowning in a sea of lies. But even as I stood there, the remnants of the betrayal still clung to me. I had given her everything, and she had thrown it away without a second thought. I had loved her. I had trusted her, and in the end, that trust had been shattered into a million pieces. She had thought she could play me, that she could have everything without paying the price. She thought I would always forgive her, that I would always be the one to clean up her mess. But now, as I stood in the silence of the house, I knew that I was done. She was the one who had to face the consequences of her actions. I glanced at the divorce papers still sitting on the table, the finality of them weighing heavily in the room. She had signed them. She had sealed her fate. There was no going back. No apology could change what had happened. The woman I had loved, the woman who had promised to be my partner, had betrayed me in the most devastating way possible. She had made a fool of me, and now, she was paying the price. A small part of me wondered if she was feeling the same weight of realization that I was if she knew, deep down, that she had lost everything. But I couldn't bring myself to care. She had chosen this path. She had pushed me to this point. She had made me the villain in her story, and now, I was the one walking away with my dignity intact. I thought about the life she would return to. The one she had chosen for herself when she decided to throw everything away. I wondered if she had any idea what was waiting for her when she walked out that door. Would she call Luca, the man who had been her escape, the one who had enjoyed the life I had built for her? Or would she finally realize that she had no one left? That when the money ran out, so did the people who had been riding her coattails. She had spent so much time trying to live in a world of illusion, but now, that illusion was shattered. It was almost poetic. I had been the one to give her everything, and now, I was the one who had taken it all away. I had taken back my life, my power, and there was nothing she could do to change it. She had been so sure of herself, so confident that she could keep up the facade, but in the end, it had all fallen apart. And I was standing here, knowing that I had finally won. I let out a breath, feeling the weight of the past few months begin to lift off my shoulders. The house was quiet now, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could finally begin to heal. The silence in the house was almost unbearable. It was the kind of silence that wraps around you, pressing down, making every sound feel amplified. I stared at the spot where Vivienne had stood just moments ago, her fragile hope that I might change my mind hanging in the air. I could still hear her voice in my head, pleading, desperate for me to undo what was done. But I didn't move, I didn't flinch. It was over, and I had made my choice. She had made hers, and now it was time for her to live with the consequences. I let the silence stretch, feeling the tension in the room thicken. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't worried about what was coming next. I wasn't afraid of the fallout. I was done carrying the weight of her lies, of being the one who had to clean up the mess she had made of our lives. She had taken too much from me, and now, I was taking it back. It was strange, how calm I felt. All those years of doubt, of wondering if I had been wrong about her, wondering if I had somehow failed her. All of it was gone now. The doubts that had eaten away at me were no longer there, replaced by a cold clarity. Vivienne had taken me for granted. She had thought she could keep up this charade forever, but I had seen through it. And now, she was learning the hard way that actions have consequences. The thought of her out there, still reeling from what had just happened, gave me a strange sense of satisfaction. She was out there somewhere, standing at the edge of the life she had taken for granted, trying to hold on to something she couldn't keep. I wondered if she realized how much she had lost. Did she understand that when she walked out the door today, she had lost more than just me? She had lost everything she had built on the lie of our marriage. All the comfort, all the luxury, all the things she had been so sure of, gone in an instant. And the worst part, there was no one left to pick up the pieces for her. Not Luca, not anyone. She was on her own now, and it was exactly what she deserved. I couldn't help but think about what would happen next. She had always prided herself on being in control, on having the world at her feet, always with the perfect outfit, the perfect smile, the perfect life. But that life was gone. How would she cope with the sudden reality of her situation? How would she feel when she realized that no one was going to save her? When she tried to call Luca, the man she had thrown everything away for, would he pick up the phone? Or would he, too, leave her stranded? I didn't know the answers, but I knew she was about to learn just how lonely the world could be when you burned all your bridges. The thought of her trying to call me again, knowing I wouldn't pick up, brought a bitter smile to my lips. It was almost too perfect. She had always relied on me to fix everything. Always. But not this time. This time, I was done. There would be no more second chances. No more running back into my arms. The Vivienne I had loved was gone, replaced by a woman who had shattered everything she had ever known. And now, she would have to face that reality alone. No apologies, no explanations. Just the cold, hard truth that she had pushed me too far. I walked toward the door, my hand resting on the handle as I stared out the window. Knowing that she wouldn't be coming back. The last remnants of our life together were slipping away, and it felt almost surreal. But in that moment, I didn't feel regret. I didn't feel sadness. All I felt was the steady beat of a heart that was no longer weighed down by the lies and deceit that had once been part of my everyday. The door creaked open, and I stepped outside. feeling the weight of the last few months lift off my shoulders. It was over, and it was time for me to move on. Vivienne was no longer a part of my world, and for the first time in a long time, I could finally breathe again. The hours stretched on, but I didn't need to look at the clock to know what time it was. I could feel the tension building, thickening the air around me. Vivienne's absence was almost palpable, like a weight that I'd been carrying for years had finally been lifted, leaving only an eerie quiet in its place. There was no more uncertainty, no more wondering. It was done. She was gone, and with that, everything changed. But even now, the fallout wasn't over. I had been through the worst of it, but I knew what was coming next. The final confrontation. I didn't expect Vivienne to come crawling back, but there was something inside me that couldn't help but imagine at the phone call. The sound of her voice cracking with desperation. She would try to explain, to beg for a second chance. But it was too late. The moment she stepped out of that door, she had already sealed her fate. I had been calm up until now, collected and focused on what had to be done. But as the hours ticked by, a knot of anticipation tightened in my chest. I was ready for the phone call, ready for her to come back, to try to make it all go away. But I wasn't going to let her this time. The thought of her stumbling back, trying to fix everything, trying to manipulate me into feeling sorry for her, made my skin crawl. For years, I had been the one who forgave, the one who always picked up the pieces, the one who kept her world intact. But now, she would be left with nothing. I could almost picture the scene. She'd call, her voice trembling, her pleas falling on deaf ears. She'd beg for help, but I wouldn't pick up. Not this time. I wouldn't be the one to save her anymore. It was time for her to feel what it was like to be powerless. And then, the call came. It buzzed in my pocket, the sound sharp and insistent. But I didn't rush to answer. I let it ring, knowing exactly who it was. Vivienne. She had finally realized that she had nothing left, no way to get what she wanted, no one to fix her mess. I let it ring again, taking a moment to steady my breath. I didn't need to speak to her. I didn't need to hear the words that I had already heard 1,000 times. The apology, the guilt, the promise to change. It didn't matter anymore. She had betrayed me, and nothing could undo that. I let the silence stretch between us, feeling the power shift completely. She would call again, of course. And when she did, it would be the same desperate, broken tone I had heard on the other side of the door earlier. I didn't need to answer. The truth was clear now. Vivienne had lost everything. And as much as she tried to scramble and fix it, as much as she begged and pleaded, there was nothing she could do to change the fact that the life we once had was gone. The phone rang a third time. I could hear the crack in her voice even before I answered. David, please, you have to listen to me. I made a mistake, okay? I'm sorry. I know I've messed everything up. I need you. I can't fix this without you. Please, don't leave me like this. You can't do this to me, not now, not when I need you the most. It was the same manipulative speech she had used before. The same desperate plea that had once made me cave in. Once made me believe that she truly cared. But now, it felt hollow. It felt empty. I didn't care anymore. Not after everything she had done. I had given her so many chances, so many opportunities to come clean, to tell the truth, to make things right. But now, all I heard was the desperation in her voice, the panic, the realization that she had nowhere left to turn. She had burned every bridge, and there was nothing left to save her. I leaned back in my chair, letting the silence hang for a moment before I spoke. Vivienne, I said, my voice low, firm, and unyielding. You had your chances, but you've made your choices. And now, you're going to have to live with them. I'm done. I'm not going to fix this for you, not anymore. Her sobs on the other end of the line were almost drowned out by the finality in my words. I felt no sympathy. I felt no regret. This was what she had earned. This was the price she had to pay. The calls, the begging, they wouldn't change anything. The game was over. And with that, I hung up the phone. This time, there would be no turning back. The days after Vivienne left felt surreal. There was an eerie stillness in the house that I wasn't sure I was ready for. The space we once shared was quiet now, empty of the chaos, the lies, the half-truths. I kept telling myself that I had done the right thing, that I was freeing myself from the weight of a relationship that had become nothing but a burden. But there were moments, brief flashes, when the reality of it hit me. It was over. Our marriage, the life I had worked so hard to build, was gone. And no matter how much I tried to convince myself that this was for the best, a part of me still felt the sting of loss. It wasn't the loss of her, not exactly. It was the loss of the idea of her. The woman I thought I knew, the woman I trusted, the woman I loved. She had turned out to be nothing more than an illusion. A mirage I had chased for years, believing in the story she told, the life she promised. But it was all built on lies. The luxury, the affection, the shared dreams, they were all part of a game she had been playing. And I had been her unwitting pawn. I thought back to the beginning of it all. When we first met, Vivienne was everything I ever wanted. She was beautiful, charming, with a kind of magnetism that drew people in. Her laugh, her smile, the way she carried herself, everything about her felt effortless. Like she belonged in a world that I could never quite reach. But I wanted her. And I worked hard to give her everything she wanted, everything she needed. I thought that was love. I thought that's what marriage was. Two people building a life together, supporting each other, trusting each other. I was wrong. As the days passed, I didn't hear from Vivienne. She was probably out there, trying to piece her own life together, just like I was. Maybe she thought I would come around, that I would give in to her pleas. I didn't. I couldn't. Because in the back of my mind, I knew something now that I hadn't allowed myself to see before. She would never change. She had shown me who she was. And that woman wasn't someone I could ever trust again. I wasn't going to waste any more time trying to fix something that was beyond repair. The house was quiet, and I was beginning to enjoy the stillness. The chaos had drained me, but now, in the silence, I found a sense of clarity. I started to focus on myself, on what I wanted, on what I deserved. I didn't have to worry about keeping up with her lifestyle or living in the shadow of her lies. It felt like I was finally breathing for the first time in years. The weight of her presence, her demands, her expectations, had been suffocating. Now, there was just peace. But that peace wasn't going to last forever. I knew Vivienne. I knew she wouldn't just let this go. The call would come, and it did, just as I had expected. The phone buzzed with her name, and I stared at it for a long moment. Part of me wanted to pick it up, to hear her out, to listen to whatever excuse she was going to throw at me this time. But I knew better. I had already heard enough. The same manipulation, the same desperation. She had no more power over me. I wasn't going to let her back into my life. I let the phone ring until it went to voicemail. I didn't need to hear what she had to say. I knew it would be the same story, the same tired plea for another chance. But this time, I wasn't the one who was going to forgive her. I wasn't the one who was going to make it right. She had to fix this on her own. And I wasn't going to give her the chance to drag me back into her web of lies. Not anymore. The voicemail was the same as it always was. Her voice shaking. Her words tumbling out in a frantic rush. She apologized, begged, promised she would do better. But I didn't care anymore. I was done. I had made my decision. And it was final. I couldn't let her make a fool of me again. I couldn't let myself fall for the same tricks. I deleted the message without a second thought. As the days turned into weeks, I settled into my new life. The divorce was finalized quickly, and I took what I was owed. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It wasn't about getting back at her for what she had done. It was about regaining control of my own life. About finding a sense of peace again, a peace that had been missing for so long. I didn't need her anymore. I didn't need the drama, the lies, the constant questioning of everything I thought I knew. The phone never rang again. I didn't expect it to. Vivienne had finally realized the truth. She had lost. Everything she had fought so hard to build with me, everything she had convinced herself was part of her perfect life, was gone. And there was no one left to help her pick up the pieces. The world she had created for herself had fallen apart, and she had no one but herself to blame. I didn't pity her. I didn't feel sorry for her. She had made her choices. She had thrown everything away for a fleeting moment of excitement. She had sacrificed trust, loyalty, and love for a man who had never cared for her, who had used her for the same thing she had used me for. Now, she was left with nothing. No money, no luxury, no one to support her when the going got tough. I had no sympathy for her. Because in the end, it was her choices that had led her here. And now, she would have to face the consequences. For me, the hardest part was done. I had made it through the pain. I had made it through the betrayal. And now, I was free. Free from the past. Free from the lies. Free from Vivienne. And for the first time in a long time, I was finally starting to believe that maybe, just maybe, I could start again. You won't believe what happens next. After all the lies, betrayal, and heartbreak, the final twist will leave you speechless. How do you think this story ends? Do you agree with the final decision, or is it just too much? The shocking truth is finally revealed, but there's one more thing you didn't expect. Leave a comment, what would you have done if you were in my shoes? Hit like if you think the revenge was deserved, or share your thoughts on the ultimate price of betrayal. The lesson here is clear. Honesty and trust are the foundation of any relationship, and once they're broken, it's incredibly hard to rebuild. In today's world, where distractions and temptations are everywhere, it's easy to let things slip. But don't let someone take you for granted, no matter how much you give. Respect yourself enough to walk away when you're no longer valued. Life is too short to stay in a toxic situation, whether it's personal or professional. Protect your peace, demand respect, and remember, if someone betrays your trust, they're the ones who lose everything, not you.